Sometimes the people escorted out of first class are the ones who own the runway. The sharp crack of plastic snapping in half echoed through the Delta Crown Executive Lounge louder than the boarding announcement overhead. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Champagne glasses froze halfway to expensive lips. Even the pianist near the private whiskey bar missed a note. Olivia Bennet stood perfectly still beside the marble reception desk, one hand resting protectively against her 7-month pregnant belly, while the broken remains of her black VIP card dropped onto the polished floor between her heels. "You heard me," Vanessa Hart said coldly, adjusting the silk scarf around her neck like she belonged in a luxury magazine instead of an airport lounge. "This area is reserved for premium executive members, not women pretending to be one." A few nervous chuckles spread through the crowded lounge. Someone lifted a phone, then another. Olivia slowly looked around the room. Wall-to-wall glass overlooked the glowing runway outside, where private jets taxied beneath streaks of rain and blue landing lights. The smell of fresh espresso and expensive cologne lingered in the air. Somewhere above them, a boarding announcement called for first-class passengers heading to New York. But inside the lounge, the atmosphere had shifted completely. Quiet, sharp, watching. Olivia swallowed carefully. The baby moved beneath her cream-colored cashmere coat, almost sensing the tension surrounding them. "There must be a mistake," she said softly. Her voice stayed calm, but exhaustion clung to every syllable. Vanessa laughed without humor. "No mistake. We checked your membership status twice." She leaned closer, lowering her voice just enough to sound cruel instead of loud. "Honestly, it's embarrassing. Women like you always think marrying a CEO means the world belongs to you." Several businessmen exchanged awkward glances. One older woman near the wine station frowned visibly, but nobody stepped forward. Nobody ever did in places like this. Olivia tightened her grip on the handle of her carry-on suitcase. She had spent the last 3 hours traveling through delayed flights, swollen ankles, and sharp back pain just trying to make it home before the storm grounded every departing plane on the East Coast. All she wanted now was a quiet seat and 10 minutes to breathe. Instead, Vanessa snapped her fingers toward security. "Remove her." The words landed harder than the rain slamming against the giant terminal windows. A uniformed airport security officer approached cautiously. "Ma'am," he began carefully, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave the lounge area." Olivia looked at him for a long moment. Not angry, not emotional, just tired in a way that made her look older than 30. Then she glanced past him toward the entrance. Her husband, Damian Cole, had just stepped inside the terminal corridor wearing a charcoal suit with his phone pressed to his ear. The CEO of Crown Atlantic Airways. The man whose face appeared on Forbes covers and airport billboards across America. Beside him walked Vanessa's reflection in another form. Tall, polished, smiling. Damian saw Olivia immediately. His expression tightened for half a second. Recognition. Discomfort. Then nothing. He looked away. Olivia felt something cold settle quietly inside her chest. Not heartbreak. That part had already happened months ago. This was something heavier. Final. Vanessa noticed it too and smiled wider. "See," she whispered. "Even your husband knows you don't belong here." The security officer reached for Olivia's suitcase handle. The moment his hand touched it, the baby kicked sharply inside her stomach. Olivia inhaled slowly, steadying herself against the marble counter. Then finally she spoke. Quietly, clearly. "You may want to call the board before you do this." The security officer hesitated the second Olivia said the word board. Not because she raised her voice. She did not. It was the calmness that unsettled him. People who lied usually became louder when embarrassed. Olivia Bennet only looked tired. Rainwater streaked down the giant terminal windows behind her, turning the runway lights into blurred ribbons of blue and gold. Somewhere overhead, thunder rolled softly through the night sky. Vanessa crossed her arms. "Do not make this more difficult than it already is." Olivia slowly bent down and picked up the broken pieces of her black VIP card from the marble floor. Her fingers lingered on the gold lettering for half a second before slipping the pieces quietly into her handbag. Around the lounge, the whispers had already started. "Is that Damian Cole's wife? I thought she disappeared months ago. She looks exhausted. What is going on?" Damian finally lowered his phone. His jaw tightened as he approached the reception desk, but even now his attention drifted more toward the watching crowd than toward his pregnant wife. That hurt more than Olivia wanted to admit. 3 years earlier, Damien would have crossed an entire airport just to carry her coffee. Back then, Crown Atlantic Airways had been drowning in debt, and sleeping in airport offices had felt romantic instead of desperate. Olivia remembered sitting beside him on the floor of a tiny conference room, eating vending machine pretzels at 2 in the morning while they argued over flight schedules and fuel contracts. She had believed in him before anyone else did. Before the interviews. Before the private jets. Before Wall Street started calling Damien Cole the Golden King of aviation. Olivia, Damien said quietly, stepping closer. Maybe you should head home. I will handle this later. Later. The word almost made her laugh. Later was where Damien placed every uncomfortable truth now. Later became missed dinners, empty hospital appointments, and unanswered phone calls, while headlines photographed him smiling beside younger women at corporate charity galas. Vanessa moved beside him naturally, like she already belonged there. She caused a disruption in the lounge. Vanessa explained smoothly to Damien, even though everybody knew that was not true. I was protecting executive guests. Olivia studied her husband carefully, waiting, hoping maybe for one sentence. One moment where he would finally choose dignity over image. But Damien only rubbed his temple tiredly. Olivia, please do not do this here. There it was. Not concerned for her. Not concerned for the baby. Concerned for the scene. The baby shifted again beneath Olivia's coat, and a sharp ache pulled across her lower back. She inhaled slowly, trying not to show discomfort. The last thing she wanted was sympathy from strangers holding smartphones. Across the lounge, television screens played muted financial news while passengers typed on laptops, pretending not to stare. A little girl near the dessert station looked up at Olivia with wide, nervous eyes before tugging softly on her mother's sleeve. Mom, she whispered too loudly. Why are they being mean to the pregnant lady? Silence spread through the room like spilled ink. Vanessa's smile flickered for the first time. Damien looked away. Olivia felt something inside her settle completely. A quiet realization colder than anger. She had spent too long shrinking herself to protect a man who no longer protected her. The security officer cleared his throat awkwardly. Ma'am, I really need to escort you out. Olivia nodded once. Of course. She reached for her suitcase handle herself before anyone else could touch it. Then she looked directly at Damien. You should answer your phone, she said softly. The board has probably started calling by now. Damien frowned immediately. Almost on instinct, his hand moved toward his jacket pocket. At that exact moment, Vanessa's work tablet sitting on the marble reception desk lit up with an incoming corporate alert. Red banner. Executive priority. Her confident expression faded as she read the first line on the screen. Emergency notice. All board members report to conference channel immediately. Authorization requested by majority shareholder Olivia Bennett. The entire lounge went silent so fast, even the soft jazz music near the bar suddenly felt too loud. Vanessa stared at the glowing tablet screen like it had personally betrayed her. Her perfectly manicured fingers tightened around the edges so hard the device nearly slipped from her hands. That is not possible, she whispered. The red executive banner remained on the screen for everyone nearby to see. Authorization requested by majority shareholder Olivia Bennett. Damien stepped forward immediately. Let me see that. Vanessa handed him the tablet without speaking. Olivia watched the color slowly drain from her husband's face as he reread the notification once, then twice. Around them, the whispers returned stronger than before. Majority shareholder? What does that mean? I thought Damien owned the airline. Who is Olivia Bennett? The questions spread through the lounge like wildfire. Phones lifted higher. Somewhere in the back, a man quietly started recording video. Damien finally looked at Olivia directly for the first time all night. Really looked at her. Not as an inconvenience. Not as his quiet pregnant wife standing in the wrong place. But as someone he suddenly realized he did not fully know at all. Olivia, he said carefully. What is this? She adjusted the strap of her handbag over her shoulder. Calm. Composed. The exact opposite of Vanessa, who now looked like she could barely breathe. A corporate emergency meeting, Olivia answered softly. You should attend. Vanessa forced out a nervous laugh. This is ridiculous. She is bluffing. Nobody joined her laughter. Not even Damien. Another notification appeared across the tablet screen. Board members now entering secure channel. Then another. Then another. Damien's own phone began vibrating nonstop inside his jacket pocket. Executive calls. Legal department. investor relations, public relations. The entire upper structure of Crown Atlantic Airways waking up at once like a giant machine, responding to an alarm. Olivia slowly reached down and rubbed the side of her stomach as another sharp wave of pressure tightened across her back. The stress was exhausting her faster now. The baby shifted restlessly beneath her coat. Damien noticed the movement immediately. For one brief second, guilt crossed his face. "You should be resting," he said quietly. Olivia almost smiled at the irony. "I tried," she replied. "But apparently, I do not belong in the lounge." A businessman near the espresso machine coughed awkwardly into his cup. Vanessa straightened quickly, trying to recover control. "Damien, tell security to remove her now before she causes more damage." But her voice sounded thinner now, less confident, like someone realizing the floor beneath them was beginning to crack. Damien did not answer right away. Instead, he stared at Olivia with growing confusion. Pieces of old conversations were finally rearranging themselves in his head. The unexplained financial rescue 6 years earlier when Crown Atlantic was hours from bankruptcy. The anonymous trust that purchased controlling shares during the fuel crisis. The silent board members who always treated Olivia with strange respect at charity events. He had never questioned it because he never imagined his wife was connected to any of it. Olivia watched realization slowly unfold across his expression, and somehow that hurt more than the humiliation. After everything they had built together, he still never truly saw her. Thunder rattled softly outside the terminal windows. Rain streaked down the glass behind Olivia, turning the runway lights into shimmering silver lines. Then another sound cut through the tension. Heavy footsteps approaching rapidly across marble floors. Purposeful. Controlled. Several airport employees immediately stepped aside as a tall man in a dark Federal Aviation security jacket entered the lounge. Broad shoulders, military posture, sharp green eyes scanning the room in seconds. Ethan Bennett stopped the moment he saw Olivia standing there pale and exhausted beside her suitcase. His jaw tightened instantly. "Liv," he said quietly. Olivia exhaled for what felt like the first time all night. Vanessa frowned. "Who are you?" Ethan never looked at her. His attention stayed locked on his sister's face and the strain she was trying so hard to hide. Then his eyes moved slowly toward the broken black VIP card pieces still visible inside Olivia's open handbag. The atmosphere changed immediately. Colder, sharper, dangerous in a way nobody could explain. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out his federal credentials. "Ethan Bennett," he said evenly, "head of aviation security operations." His gaze finally shifted toward Vanessa. "Now I want someone to explain why my pregnant sister was escorted out of a lounge she technically owns." Vanessa opened her mouth twice before any sound finally came out. "There has clearly been some misunderstanding," she said quickly, forcing a smile that no longer looked convincing beneath the cold white airport lights. Ethan Bennett did not react. He stepped toward Olivia, slowly, his attention focused entirely on the strain in her face. "How long have you been standing here?" he asked quietly. "Too long," Olivia admitted. Her voice sounded softer now, more tired. Ethan glanced at the security officer beside her suitcase. The man immediately released the handle and took 2 careful steps backward. Nobody in the lounge seemed interested in defending Vanessa anymore. The atmosphere had shifted completely. One moment Olivia had been treated like an inconvenience. The next, she had become the center of a corporate emergency powerful enough to make executives panic. Damien loosened his tie slowly, still staring at Ethan's federal credentials. "You are her brother?" Ethan finally looked at him directly. "Yes." One word. Flat. Controlled. Yet something in the silence behind it made Damien straighten instinctively. Ethan had the calm energy of someone trained to stay composed during disasters, while everyone else lost control. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly. "This is absurd. She never told anyone she owned shares." Olivia looked at her quietly. "You never asked." Another uncomfortable silence followed. Rain hammered harder against the terminal windows, now turning the runway outside into blurred silver streaks beneath flashing taxi lights. Overhead, another boarding announcement echoed through the terminal, but almost nobody inside the lounge moved anymore. Every eye remained fixed on Olivia. On the pregnant woman they had just publicly humiliated. Damien's phone vibrated again. Then again. Finally he answered. "What?" His expression changed instantly. "No, that cannot happen tonight." He turned away, lowering his voice, but not enough. Delay the board vote until morning. A pause. Then another. Damien's jaw tightened harder. Who authorized legal review? Olivia slowly lowered herself into one of the leather lounge chairs nearby, finally allowing herself to sit. The baby had been pressing painfully against her ribs for the last 20 minutes, and exhaustion now settled deep into her bones. Ethan immediately crouched beside her. You okay? Olivia nodded once, although her breathing had become shallow. Ethan noticed anyway. He always noticed. Ever since they were children, he had treated her like someone precious in a world that moved too rough and too fast. When their parents died, Ethan had practically raised her himself while balancing military school applications and 2 part-time jobs. Back then, Olivia used to joke that Ethan looked at every room like he was already planning escape routes. Tonight, he scanned the lounge the same way. Protective. Alert. Ready. Vanessa suddenly stepped forward again, desperate to regain authority. Damien, tell them the board answers to you. Nobody answered her immediately because deep down, everyone in the room now understood something she still refused to accept. Damien controlled operations. Olivia controlled ownership. There was a difference. A very dangerous difference. One of the airport televisions abruptly switched from financial news to a breaking business alert banner. The volume remained muted, but the headline alone made several passengers gasp aloud. Crown Atlantic Airways calls emergency executive session after internal shareholder dispute. Another phone lifted to record. Then another. Vanessa's face went pale. Oh my God, she whispered. Damien rubbed both hands over his face, looking suddenly older than 42. Olivia, he said quietly. Why are you doing this publicly? Olivia stared out through the giant glass windows at the storm covering the runway. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then finally, she looked back at him. I spent years protecting your image, she answered softly. Even tonight, I only wanted somewhere quiet to sit before my flight. Damien had no response to that. Because it was true. Every person in the lounge could feel it now. This situation had not exploded because Olivia created drama. It exploded because people kept underestimating the quiet woman standing in front of them. Ethan's phone buzzed once in his jacket pocket. He glanced at the screen briefly, then looked toward Olivia. The board wants you upstairs immediately, he said. Executive conference suite. Vanessa laughed nervously. You are not seriously letting her walk into a board meeting after all this. Ethan stood slowly beside his sister. No, he replied calmly. They are waiting for their owner. The private executive elevator opened with a soft chime that sounded strangely delicate compared to the storm raging outside the terminal windows. Olivia stepped inside, slowly, one hand resting against the polished brass railing while Ethan stood beside her like a silent wall between her and the world. Damien entered a second later. Vanessa tried to follow, but Ethan blocked the doorway with one arm before she could step in. Board members only, he said calmly. Vanessa stared at him in disbelief. You cannot keep me out. Ethan glanced briefly toward her security badge still hanging around her neck. Actually, he replied evenly, I can. The elevator doors closed before she could answer. Silence filled the ride upward except for the soft hum of machinery and the distant echo of thunder outside. Damien loosened his tie again, unable to stop pacing inside the confined space. Olivia watched his reflection shift nervously across the mirrored walls. This was new for him. Damien Cole was a man who controlled rooms, controlled interviews, controlled investors, controlled headlines. But tonight control kept slipping through his fingers one layer at a time. Why did you never tell me? He finally asked quietly. Olivia kept her eyes forward. You never asked where the money came from. Damien frowned. What money? Ethan let out a short, humorless laugh. The $48 million that saved Crown Atlantic during the fuel collapse 6 years ago. Damien looked stunned. Olivia remembered that winter clearly now. The company had been 72 hours from shutting down completely. Employees were preparing layoffs. News channels predicted bankruptcy. Damien barely slept for weeks. He had sat at their kitchen counter one night, staring at unpaid invoices with tears in his eyes, thinking nobody noticed. But Olivia noticed everything back then. The Bennett Family Trust had been created decades earlier by her grandfather, who quietly built aviation manufacturing contracts during the 70s. Old money. Invisible money. The kind that never appeared in magazines because it never needed attention. Olivia had liquidated part of her inheritance through anonymous corporate structures, and transferred the funds without ever attaching her name. Damien had called it a miracle at the time. He never realized the miracle had been sitting across from him every night eating takeout noodles in sweatpants. "You own the shares this entire time?" Damien asked slowly. Olivia nodded once. 51% after the restructuring. Damien leaned heavily against the elevator wall like the air had suddenly become too thin. My God! The doors opened onto the executive conference floor before anyone else spoke. Immediately, the atmosphere changed. Senior executives lined the hallway outside the glass conference suite, whispering urgently into phones, while legal teams rushed between offices carrying tablets and printed contracts. The moment Olivia stepped off the elevator, conversation stopped. Every head turned toward her. Not Damien. Her. Ethan stayed close as Olivia walked slowly down the corridor beneath cold recessed lighting reflecting against marble floors. Through the giant windows behind them, airplanes taxied through sheets of rain while lightning flashed across the distant runway. The entire airport felt suspended in tension. A gray-haired board member named Walter Grayson hurried toward Olivia first. "Mrs. Bennett," he said breathlessly. "Thank God you are here." Damien stared at the man. "You knew?" Walter looked confused. "Of course we knew." Several other executives exchanged uncomfortable glances. One woman lowered her eyes entirely. Damien suddenly understood something even worse than the hidden ownership. Everyone important around him had known for years except him. Olivia entered the executive suite quietly. A massive digital display already glowed across the wall showing emergency shareholder procedures. Her name appeared at the top authorization line in bold white letters. Olivia Bennett. Majority ownership control. Damien stopped in the doorway staring at the screen, while memories began crashing into place all at once. The board members always deferred politely to Olivia at company galas. Investors strangely relaxed whenever she attended negotiations. The legal department calling her directly during crises instead of going through him. He had mistaken respect for courtesy because he never imagined his quiet wife held more power than everyone in the room combined. Olivia slowly removed her coat and draped it over the back of a leather chair. Her pregnancy showed clearly now beneath the soft cream dress, and exhaustion shadowed her face despite the calmness in her posture. Yet the moment she sat down, the entire boardroom unconsciously straightened. Like royalty had finally entered the room. Then the conference room doors opened again. Vanessa walked inside anyway, pale, furious, and determined. "Damien," she snapped. "Tell them this is insane." Nobody answered her immediately because at that exact moment the main monitor switched automatically to airport surveillance footage from the VIP lounge downstairs. The surveillance footage filled the entire wall in sharp, high-definition clarity. Every angle, every word, every expression. The room became completely silent except for the low hum of the airport storm outside and the distant rumble of airplanes moving across wet runway pavement. Vanessa froze the moment her own voice echoed through the speakers. "This lounge is for premium members, not women pretending to belong here." Nobody moved. Nobody looked away. The footage showed Olivia standing quietly beside the reception desk, one hand protecting her stomach, while passengers stared and phones recorded from every direction. Then the video captured the exact moment Vanessa snapped Olivia's black executive card in half. The sharp crack echoed through the boardroom speakers like a judge's gavel. One board member actually closed his eyes. Damien stared at the screen in disbelief. Watching humiliation always felt different when it happened to strangers. But seeing his pregnant wife publicly embarrassed while he stood there doing nothing turned the footage into something unbearable. Vanessa stepped forward immediately. It was taken out of context. Her voice shook now. "I was following protocol." Ethan crossed his arms near the conference room entrance. "Interesting protocol," he replied evenly. "Especially considering the owner of the airline was standing in front of you." Another section of footage began playing automatically. Vanessa ordering security to remove Olivia. Vanessa calling her an embarrassment. Vanessa smiling while Olivia struggled to remain composed. The room grew colder with every passing second. Walter Grayson finally broke the silence. "Miss Hart," he said carefully, "do you understand what kind of legal exposure this creates for the company?" Vanessa looked desperately toward Damien for support. "Damien knows I was protecting the brand." Damien still did not answer. He remained locked on the screen, watching himself ignore Olivia downstairs while she stood alone in front of an entire lounge full of strangers. He looked smaller in the footage than he ever had in real life. Weaker somehow. Olivia sat quietly at the end of the long conference table, rubbing slow circles against the side of her stomach. Her face remained calm, but exhaustion weighed heavily beneath her eyes now. The adrenaline that carried her through the confrontation downstairs was fading, and Ethan noticed immediately. He stepped beside her chair and lowered his voice. "You need water." Olivia nodded faintly. One of the executives hurried to bring her a glass without being asked. Nobody ignored Olivia Bennett anymore. Another alert suddenly flashed across the giant wall monitor, interrupting the surveillance footage. Social media trending alert. The boardroom collectively looked up. Multiple videos from the VIP lounge incident had already spread online. Passenger recordings. Clips of Vanessa snapping the card. Clips of Olivia being escorted toward the exit. Clips of Damien standing silently nearby. Millions of followers. Aviation blogs. Financial reporters. Hashtags multiplying by the second. One video title froze everyone in place. Pregnant woman removed from airline VIP lounge before shock owner reveal. Vanessa sat down hard in one of the leather chairs like her knees suddenly stopped working. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Damien finally spoke, but his voice sounded distant now. "Public relations?" A nervous executive near the far side of the table swallowed hard. "The story is spreading too fast. News outlets already picked it up." Another phone buzzed. Then another. The crisis was escaping containment in real time. Olivia slowly lifted her eyes toward the giant screen, showing frozen footage of herself standing alone downstairs moments earlier. She barely recognized that woman now. Not because she looked weak. Because she looked finished. Finished apologizing. Finished shrinking herself. Finished protecting people who would never protect her back. Ethan glanced toward the legal department representatives gathered near the conference room wall. "Pull the full security archive," he said calmly. "Every angle from the lounge and terminal." Vanessa snapped her head upward immediately. "Why?" Ethan looked at her without emotion. "Because the footage also captured you shoving my sister's suitcase hard enough to nearly knock her off balance while she was 7 months pregnant." The room went dead silent again. Damien's head turned sharply toward Vanessa. "What?" Vanessa stood instantly. "That is not what happened." Ethan pressed a button on the conference room remote control. A second camera angle appeared on screen. Crystal clear. Vanessa grabbing Olivia's suitcase aggressively, while Olivia stumbled sideways, catching herself against the marble counter. A collective breath swept through the boardroom. Olivia closed her eyes briefly, remembering the sharp pressure that hit her lower back in that exact moment downstairs. Ethan's voice remained calm, but colder now than the storm outside. "Now," he said quietly, "would anyone else like to explain what exactly happened to my sister tonight?" Vanessa stared at the surveillance footage like she could somehow force it to change if she refused to blink. But the video remained brutally clear beneath the cold glow of the executive boardroom screens. Her hand grabbing Olivia's suitcase. Olivia losing balance for one dangerous second before catching herself against the marble counter. The room stayed silent long enough for the sound of rain hitting the windows to become deafening. Damien slowly turned toward Vanessa. "You told me she caused a disturbance." Vanessa shook her head immediately. "She did." "Damien, you do not understand how this looks for the company." Ethan let out another humorless laugh. "No," he replied quietly. "I think the entire country understands exactly how this looks." One of the younger board members refreshed his tablet and visibly paled. The video's already passed 12 million views. Another executive whispered something under his breath about sponsors threatening to pull partnerships overnight. Crown Atlantic Airways had built its entire brand around luxury customer care and elite service. Now social media feeds across America were replaying footage of a visibly pregnant woman being publicly humiliated inside the company's flagship airport lounge. Worse still, the woman turned out to own the airline itself. Olivia sat quietly through all of it. Her fingers curled loosely around the untouched glass of water beside her while the baby shifted restlessly beneath her dress. The stress was beginning to wear on her physically now. Ethan noticed the slight tremor in her breathing and leaned closer. "You need a doctor?" Olivia shook her head softly. "I just need this over." Damien heard that. The words landed harder than any accusation she could have made. Because deep down he understood she was not talking about tonight. She was talking about all of it. The loneliness, the distance, the years spent standing quietly beside a man who slowly stopped seeing her at all. Another board member cleared his throat carefully. "Mrs. Bennett," he said respectfully, "given the reputational damage already unfolding, we recommend immediate executive action." Vanessa spun toward him in disbelief. "Executive action against me?" Nobody answered quickly enough, and that silence alone became her answer. Her composure finally cracked completely. "This is insane," she snapped. "I built the VIP brand strategy for this airline. I protected Damien every single day while she disappeared from public life." Olivia slowly lifted her eyes toward Vanessa for the first time in several minutes. Calm, tired, unshaken. "I disappeared because I was building a family," she said softly. "Not a spotlight." Vanessa opened her mouth, but no words came out. Because even now Olivia sounded dignified while everyone else in the room sounded desperate. Damien rubbed both hands across his face again, exhaustion finally replacing arrogance. "Why did you never tell me the truth?" he asked Olivia quietly. "About the ownership, about the trust, about all of it." Olivia looked at him for a long moment, while lightning flashed silver across the runway outside the giant conference windows. "Because I loved you before any of this existed," she answered. "I wanted at least one thing in our marriage that was real." The room fell silent again. Damien lowered his eyes immediately, unable to hold her gaze. Ethan stepped away briefly to answer another incoming federal call near the far side of the room. When he returned, his expression had hardened even further. "Media trucks are arriving downstairs," he informed the board calmly. "This story is now national." Several executives visibly panicked. Legal advisors began whispering urgently together. One public relations director actually looked close to tears. Crown Atlantic stock had already started dipping in after-hours trading, according to the financial alerts flashing across multiple tablets around the room. Then another sharp wave of discomfort tightened across Olivia's lower back, so suddenly she inhaled hard before she could stop herself. Ethan immediately crouched beside her chair again. "Liv." Olivia closed her eyes briefly, trying to steady her breathing. "I am okay," she whispered, although she clearly was not. Damien moved instinctively toward her, but stopped halfway there, uncertain whether he still had the right. That hesitation broke something invisible inside the room. Because everyone saw it. The distance between them. The cost of neglect measured not in shouting or scandal, but in silence. Olivia slowly reached into her handbag and removed a thin black folder tied with a silver ribbon. She placed it gently onto the conference table. Every eye followed the movement. Walter Grayson frowned. "What is that?" Olivia untied the ribbon carefully. "The revised executive transfer documents," she answered softly. Damien's expression changed immediately. "Olivia," she finally looked directly at him again, and for the first time all night there was no sadness left in her eyes at all. Only clarity. "You built an empire using my silence," she said quietly. "Tonight, I think everybody finally heard it break." The silver ribbon slid quietly across the conference table as Olivia opened the black folder in front of the board. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Outside the massive airport windows, lightning flashed across the storm-dark runway while planes waited beneath sheets of rain for clearance to depart. Inside the executive suite, every eye remained fixed on the woman they had underestimated for years. Olivia removed the first document carefully and placed it at the center of the table. "Effective immediately," she said softly. "I am initiating executive restructuring procedures under majority shareholder authority." The words landed like ice water across the room. Damien stared at the papers in disbelief. Legal transfer forms. Executive suspension clauses. Interim leadership restructuring. Everything already prepared. Walter Grayson adjusted his glasses nervously while the legal department began reviewing pages at rapid speed. Vanessa shook her head immediately. "No, absolutely not." Her voice cracked now under the pressure. "Damien built this airline." Olivia looked toward her calmly. "We built it," she corrected softly. "The difference is I never needed cameras to prove it." Another painful silence followed. Damien finally stepped closer to the table, his face pale beneath the harsh recessed lighting. "You are removing me?" Olivia's fingers rested lightly against the edge of the documents. "I am protecting the company." Damien looked devastated for the first time all night. Not angry, not defensive, just devastated. "Olivia, please," he said quietly. "Do not do this because of one terrible night." Ethan's expression darkened immediately from across the room. But Olivia only looked at Damien with the calm sadness of someone who had already grieved this relationship long before tonight arrived. "This did not happen in one night," she answered. "Tonight was simply the first time everyone else could see it." The boardroom remained silent except for distant thunder and the occasional vibration of phones. Receiving nonstop media alerts, one public relations executive finally spoke up carefully. "Mrs. Bennett, if we act immediately, we may still stabilize investor confidence before markets open." Vanessa stared around the room in horror, realizing nobody was fighting for her anymore. The loyalty she believed she built inside Crown Atlantic had vanished the second power shifted direction. "You cannot seriously let a pregnant, emotional woman destroy the company," she snapped suddenly. The entire room froze. Ethan took one step forward instantly, but Olivia lifted her hand, gently stopping him without even looking away from Vanessa. Calm, controlled, dangerous in a completely different way. Emotional, Olivia repeated softly. "I stood quietly while your employees humiliated me in public. I protected this company through bankruptcy. I carried this airline financially before most people in this room even knew its name. And tonight, after all of that, I still walked into this boardroom with dignity." Vanessa opened her mouth again, but no sound came out. Because deep down she understood she had already lost the room. Olivia slowly signed the first executive document with a silver pen. The sound of ink moving across paper seemed louder than the storm outside. "As majority shareholder," she said quietly, "I am placing Damien Cole on temporary executive suspension pending board review." Damien closed his eyes briefly. The words hit harder because they were delivered without cruelty. No revenge. No screaming. Just consequences. Olivia signed the second document. "Vanessa Hart's employment with Crown Atlantic Airways is terminated effective immediately." Vanessa stood so abruptly her chair rolled backward across the marble floor. "You cannot do this to me." Ethan finally spoke again, his voice calm as winter air. "Actually," he replied, "she already did." Two corporate security officers appeared quietly near the conference room entrance moments later. Vanessa looked toward Damien desperately, but he still had not moved. He looked shattered, now staring at the signed documents like pieces of his life were disappearing line by line. Olivia gently closed the black folder once everything was complete. Then exhaustion finally washed visibly across her face. Ethan immediately noticed. "That is enough," he said softly, moving beside her chair again. Olivia nodded faintly. The adrenaline carrying her through the night was fading fast. Outside, the storm finally began clearing beyond the terminal windows. One by one, runway lights sharpened through the rain, again bright against the darkness. Walter Grayson cleared his throat respectfully. "Mrs. Bennett," he asked carefully, "what would you like us to tell the press?" Olivia slowly stood despite the ache pulling through her back and rested one hand over her stomach. For a moment, she looked out across the airport she quietly owned. The terminals, the planes, the employees rushing beneath glowing lights far below. Then she answered without raising her voice at all. "Tell them the airline will continue operating exactly as scheduled," she said softly. "But from now on, we remember that dignity is not a privilege reserved for first class." 3 months later, the first thing passengers noticed inside Terminal 1 was the silence. Not the uncomfortable silence from that stormy night when phones recorded humiliation beside the marble reception desk. A different kind. Calm, ordered, respectful. Crown Atlantic Airways had changed in ways people could feel before they could explain them. Employees greeted passengers differently now. Customer complaints were handled faster. Training protocols shifted company-wide. Somewhere along the way, the airline stopped acting like luxury meant making people feel small. Snow drifted lightly outside the giant terminal windows, while departure boards flickered across the early morning crowds preparing for Christmas travel. Near the center of the terminal, a massive digital billboard displayed the newest Forbes cover. Olivia Bennett stood on the front wearing a cream-colored coat, while holding her infant son against her shoulder. Beneath the headline, "The Quiet Woman Who Took Back the Sky." Travelers slowed as they passed the screen. Some recognized her immediately. Others recognized the story. Millions of people had watched the videos months earlier. Millions more watched what happened afterward. Crown Atlantic stock recovered within weeks after Olivia's leadership changes stabilized investor confidence. Customer approval ratings reached record highs by winter. Even aviation analysts admitted privately that the company looked stronger now than it had in years. Olivia stepped through the terminal quietly that morning carrying her sleeping baby, while Ethan walked beside her, holding a small black diaper bag that looked absurdly tiny against his broad frame. He still scanned every room like a military officer entering secured territory, but the sharp tension he carried that night had softened now whenever he looked at his nephew. "You know," Ethan said quietly glancing toward the giant billboard overhead. "Mom would have loved that cover." Olivia smiled faintly. She would have complained about the lighting first. Ethan laughed under his breath. The sound felt warm against the cold December air drifting through the terminal entrance doors. As they approached the renovated executive lounge, several employees immediately straightened. The new lounge looked different now. Brighter lighting, open seating, no velvet ropes separating passengers by status tiers near the entrance. Above the marble reception desk, a small silver plaque had been installed after the restructuring. "Every passenger deserves dignity." Olivia paused briefly when she saw it. She never asked for the plaque. The employees added it themselves. A young receptionist behind the desk recognized her instantly and stood so quickly she nearly knocked over her tablet. "Mrs. Bennett," she said nervously. "Welcome back." Olivia smiled gently. "Thank you." The receptionist glanced toward the sleeping baby in Olivia's arms, and her entire expression softened. "He is beautiful." Ethan leaned closer. "Gets that from our side of the family." Olivia rolled her eyes quietly while the receptionist laughed. For the first time in months, the terminal around her no longer felt heavy. No cameras shoved toward her face. No whispers following her through hallways.